over to your Master of Ceremony, Dr. George Johnson.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. It's good to see you all here. It is a special occasion with Alice Munro winning the Nobel Prize. And it's a great moment for writing by women. We also had Eleanor Catton, a Canadian-born writer who won the Man Booker Prize this year, and now Alice Munro winning the Nobel Prize. It's a great moment for the short story as a genre, I think, sometimes underrated, but I think it's coming back into vogue, probably partly because people don't have the time to read those big novels like they used to, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, when we heard that Alice Munro was going to be awarded the Nobel Prize, some of us in the department thought we can't let this go without some kind of recognition, because so many of us have taught Alice Munro over the years, including myself. And also because she's just a great writer. She's one of those modest writers, humble writers. She doesn't make a big splash with attending awards and ceremonies and so on, but she is nonetheless a very, very accomplished writer of the short story. There's no doubt about that. And she chronicles mundane domestic lives for the most part. And I think when she first started to write in the late 1960s, she was criticized for that, when it was a time when women writers were maybe not taken as seriously as they should have been. And she wrote about a particular area of Ontario, which I know very well. I was born and raised just east of Alice Munro country. The area that she writes about is Huron County, which goes out to Lake Huron, and I'm from just east of that, near Hamilton. But I went to the University of Western Ontario as an undergraduate, which is where Alice Munro went for a couple of years before she had to drop out because she did not have the funding to continue, which is just a little plug for arts funding. We need to keep that in mind at all times. Anyway, I went to the University of Western Ontario, and so I met the people who lived in those small towns and villages around, east of Lake Huron, coming into London, Ontario, to university. And of course, we spent a lot of time on Lake Huron as children growing up, going to the Pinery Provincial Park and other places. And the thing is that when I started to read Alice Munro, it was a moment of recognition for me, because she was the first writer I'd read who was writing about places I actually knew. Wow, I know where that is. I mean, sometimes they were disguised, fiction, in fiction, but and I knew the people, not literally, but I knew the types of people, because these were my great aunts and great uncles and the odd characters that were my dad's here from Ontario today. I'm happy to have him here, but we were just talking about all those characters that lived in our village and all the villages in southern Ontario, and Alice Munro captured those people in her writing, and as I say, it was a moment of recognition for me, because I think it was the first writer I'd read who actually wrote about where I was from, and that was pretty cool. Now I wanted to read just a little bit from Lives of Girls and Women, which I taught for many years, and it's a bildungsroman about Del Shannon, who is growing up and becoming aware of her vocation as a writer. So I'll just read a little passage from the end of that, which is very famous, and it has been quoted since she won the prize. People's lives, in Jubilee as elsewhere, were dull, simple, amazing, and unfathomable, deep caves paved with kitchen linoleum. It did not occur to me then that one day I would be so greedy for Jubilee, voracious and misguided as Uncle Craig out at Jenkins Bend, writing his history. I would want to write things down. I would try to make lists, a list of all the stores and businesses going up and down the main street, and who owned them, a list of family names, names on the tombstones in the cemetery, and any inscriptions underneath, a list of the titles of movies that played at the Lyceum Theatre from 1938 to 1950, roughly speaking, names on the cenotaph, more for the First World War than for the Second. Names of the streets and the pattern they lay in. The hope of accuracy we bring to such tasks is crazy, heartbreaking, and no list could hold what I wanted. For what I wanted was every last thing, every layer of speech and thought, stroke of light on bark or walls, every smell, pothole, pane, crack, delusion, held still and held together, radiant, everlasting. At present, I did not look much at this town. So I just wanted to read that. I think that sort of describes how Alice Munro became aware of her vocation as a writer. And now I would like to have Will Garrett-Petz, who's the Vice President, Associate VP Research, come and give us a few words about Alice Munro.
I know I'm in the company of fellow English profs when I start to see pages like this come out. We love words and we want to try and get them right, and I was so glad that George was hanging on to his pages too, and as we furtively look for them. But it's that is for the words that we composed ahead of time. Sure that if you don't say every word precisely and exactly, then it's somehow something is going to be lost. And I think some of that is there with the celebration of Alice Munro. I love the way that, well, first of all, I love the way that George is dressed today. It's great. But I also love the fact that you ended with a quotation, because that's what we do in English studies. We honor writers by contextualizing them, by appreciating them, by quoting them in full and quoting them exactly, by sharing in a way that we feel honors the word. And I suspect that that's part of the spirit of what's going on this afternoon. I read a headline in a newspaper. It said, it's a moment all of Canada has been waiting for. And you kind of go, oh, is this just hyperbole or not? But clearly not. You know, I think there is a sense with a writer like Alice Munro, a sense of identification and huge appreciation that is both national and local. And this is the local kind of articulation of that. And in a sense, it's charming. You know, we're all a part of something that's kind of lovely and charming here, as celebrating someone in her absence. But also someone who's very present because she's informed a lot in terms of the way that we've appreciated literature. And certainly, like George, that's been a very personal journey for me in terms of appreciation of a writer like Alice Munro, and Munro in particular. At 10:30 Eastern Standard Time, roughly, she was formally awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. And she was sitting in her Victoria home of her daughter Sheila, and her other daughter, Jenny, received the award on her behalf in a lavish ceremony in Stockholm. This is a local echo of that lavish Stockholm ceremony. Alice Munro, as you know, is 82, and she won the prize as the master of the contemporary short story. She was unable to attend, we're told, the ceremony, where laureates each receive a diploma, a gold medal, and approximately $1.3 million. Munro became the 110th Nobel laureate in literature and only the 13th woman to ever receive the award. She also becomes the first Canadian woman to take the award since its launch in 1901. So this is a pretty auspicious day in so many different respects. She began writing seriously in her 20s when she was a busy young mother, and she described how she launched into the short story. George mentioned the short story form as being particularly important, but it was also a vehicle of necessity for her. She talks about that choice being influenced by her immediate circumstances. It allowed her to write in disjointed sessions between preparing meals and housekeeping. So the way that we communicate, the way that we write, depends on who we are and the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And her writing itself is marked by, I think, an amazing ability to transform the everyday, to take what Bronwyn Wallace has called, to infuse her writing with a sense of common magic. And for me, that's one of the hallmarks of Alice Munro's writing. Like many of you, I came to Alice Munro kind of as a surprise. Lives of Girls and Women was the very first collection that I read. I thought I was reading a novel or a linked novel or a series of. I didn't know quite where to put it. I just knew that this was extraordinary stuff. Amazingly, That was in the late 1970s when I first came across that as an undergraduate, as an English major. Amazingly, her work was not always immediately celebrated, and certainly not in English departments. It's taken a while, but definitely Alice Munro's time has come, and I think that's a high time for that. She has said, just looking at a quotation, a recent one, she's just gone through a whole series of interviews. And although you may have read in the newspapers that she didn't have the stamina to go to Stockholm, apparently she's had great stamina for literally hundreds of interviews in the last few weeks. She said, "I'm particularly glad that winning this award will please so many Canadians. I'm happy, too, that this will bring more attention to Canadian writing." And I think that kind of generosity of spirit and that kind of mutual celebration, again, is something that we note in a writer like her. The story I like most, and I'll just finish up with this, happened about a month ago at Harbourfront Centre. They were celebrating writers, and they were giving Alice Munro an award at that point. It's an international festival of authors in Toronto. And members of the audience, Brenda, sorry for this, stood for several minutes, applauded, hooted, and hollered, whistled and screamed out their joy at Munro's accomplishment, all for her to see herself on a tape the festival was sending to her of the evening's event. George tells me that we're being videotaped here, and maybe this is an appropriate moment to say hello to Alice Munro from Kamloops as well, and to applaud her success. There you go.
Thank you very much, Will. That was great to hear the recent news about Alice Munro. And now I'd like to have another member of the English and Modern Languages Department give us a reading from one of Alice's stories, and that's Tom Friedman. So, Tom.
Of course, like Will and George, I've had nothing but appreciation for Munro since I started my academic career, having taught many of her works. You know, it's interesting, here we are in the House of Learning at TRU, and I keep thinking of the great hall of Stockholm Town Hall where the Nobel Prize for Literature is awarded. I was there a number of years ago, and it's quite a magnificent place. And you've got to wonder at the disparity between that setting and Wingham, Ontario. And the fictional Jubilee, the Flats Road. You know, all of those settings for Munro stories. And somehow you don't think that she really fits into that world, and yet she does. Her fame is universal. Publishing in the New Yorker, of course, gave her an audience far exceeding our restrictive Canadian readership. And so I think she belongs in that greater world. Munro's stories deal with what I always refer to as that heartbreaking and poignant gap between then and now. The desire to recapture the past, and certainly what George read from Lives of Girls and Women is part of that attempt by writers to recapture something of the essence of the past. And I'm going to read from a story that I find particularly meaningful in that regard. It's called Menacettung, and it's in the collection Friend of My Youth. And it's a story that deals with what Munro's longtime editor, Douglas Gibson, calls imaginative reconstruction of the past. And it's a feature of much of Munro's work. So Menacettung involves a 19th century poet, a fictional poet named Almeida Roth, who lives in a small town very similar to Wingham, to Jubilee. And she meets a very successful merchant named Jarvis Poulter, whose fame and wealth comes from salt. He discovers a deposit of salt near this town. So I'll just read this passage. Everyone takes it for granted that Almeida Roth is thinking of Jarvis Poulter as a husband and would say yes if he asked her. And she is thinking of him. She doesn't want to get her hopes up too much. She doesn't want to make a fool of herself. She would like a signal. If he attended church on Sunday evenings, there would be a chance during some months of the year to walk home after dark. He would carry a lantern. There is as yet no street lighting in town. He would swing the lantern to light the way in front of the ladies' feet and observe their narrow and delicate shape. He might catch her arm as they step off the boardwalk, but he does not go to church at night. Nor does he call for her and walk with her to church on Sunday mornings. That would be a declaration. He walks her home past his gate as far as hers. He lifts his hat then and leaves her. She does not invite him to come in. A woman living alone could never do such a thing. As soon as a man and woman of almost any age are alone together within four walls, it is assumed that anything may happen. Spontaneous combustion, instant fornication, an attack of passion, brute instinct, triumph of the senses. What possibilities men and women must see in each other to infer such dangers? Or believing in the dangers, how often they must think about the possibilities. When they walk side by side, she can smell his shaving soap, the barber's oil, his pipe tobacco, the wool and linen and leather smell of his manly clothes. The correct, orderly, heavy clothes are like those she used to brush and starch and iron for her father. She misses that job, her father's appreciation, his dark, kind authority. Jarvis Poulter's garments, his smell, his movements all cause the skin on the side of her body next to him to tingle hopefully, and a meek shiver raises the hairs on her arms. Is this to be taken as a sign of love? She thinks of him coming into their bedroom in his long underwear and his hat. She knows this outfit is ridiculous, but in her mind, he does not look so. He has the solemn effrontery of a figure in a dream. He comes into the room and lies down on the bed beside her, preparing to take her in his arms. Surely he removes his hat. She doesn't know, for at this point, a fit of welcome and submission overtakes her, a buried gasp. He would be her husband.
Thanks very much, Tom. The detail in that passage is just amazing, isn't it? And now we'll have another member of EML, and that's Elizabeth Reimer, read a passage.
When George and I started talking about this, although I'm normally reticent to read at these sorts of occasions, I was like the first one to volunteer because I think Will was talking at the end about the sense of shared joy about this, and that is what I got from so many people the day after she won, and the day she won, and then for weeks after, you'd look at people and you went, one word, Alice, and his smile. It was very spontaneous and it was very heartfelt. I think people feel very attached to her success and her writing as Canadians, just as people who have studied and read her for pleasure for so many, many years. Anyway, then trying to decide what to read, of course, is a challenge. And I narrowed it down to two, and then I found out that Tom was reading one of my two choices. And so that's good. That's a story I've also taught, and I've written on, actually. And the other one that I've taught, and I think the most anthologized of Munro's stories is Boys and Girls, from way back when in her first collection, The Dance of the Happy Shades. And thinking how anthologized it had been, I thought, well, maybe I should read something else. But then at the end of her last collection, which is probably going to be her last collection, her story, Dear Life, I read, and Tom had already sort of anticipated it for me, but she starts to rehearse and reweave some of these threads from these early stories, and it's so moving and so interesting, but I think it's worth going back. So I really just want to read a little bit, even though you probably all know this. The first thing I thought too was we have to get an ending, because for me, for Munro, it's her endings that are always so absolutely perfect, that just shock you or surprise you, but tie everything together and force you back and to reread it. And here's a story that I have reread I don't know how many times, and I still see something new in every time. So then the challenge becomes, how do you just read an ending when everything leads up to it? All roads lead to that ending. So I think I'm going to shorten it to two sections, but really I would love to have you reread the whole thing with me, but anyway. So those of you, probably a lot of you know Boys and Girls. It's probably a story you've heard. If you don't, it's a story of our narrator as a younger girl growing up. Her father's a fox farmer, and she's the eldest and the tomboy. She identifies with her father and his work, and she patronizes her younger brother Laird. And then she hits adolescence, and things shift very, very subtly and ambiguously for her. And one of the turning points, the main turning point, is when she and her younger brother observe her father and his hired man Henry killing the horse. They use their horses for meat for the foxes. And she's both matter of fact about that, but at the same time her legs are shaking at the end of it. And I won't read that part, but I will pick it up when the next day or a week later comes time for the female horse Flora to be killed. And Flora is a spirited horse, and she's been, the narrator's been observing her in her stall, kicking and creating a fuss. So I'll pick it up towards the end, and I'll just read 2 sections. This time, I didn't even think of watching it. That was something to see just one time. I had not thought about it very often since, but sometimes when I was busy working at school or standing in front of the mirror combing my hair and wondering if I would be pretty when I grew up, the whole scene would flash into my mind. I would see the easy, practiced way my father raised the gun and hear Henry laughing when Matt kicked his legs in the air. I did not have any great feeling of horror and opposition such as a city child might have had. I was too used to seeing the death of animals as a necessity by which we lived. Yet I felt a little ashamed, and there was a new wariness, a sense of holding off in my attitude to my father and his work. The stable door was open. Henry had just brought Flora out, and she had broken away from him. She was running free in the barnyard from one end to the other. We climbed up on the fence. It was exciting to see her running, whinnying, going up on her hind legs, prancing and threatening like a horse in a Western movie, an unbroken ranch horse, though she was just an old driver, an old sorrel mare. My father and Henry ran after her and tried to grab the dangling halter. They tried to work her into a corner, and they had almost succeeded when she made a run between them, wild-eyed, and disappeared around the corner of the barn. We heard the rails clatter down as she got over the fence, and Henry yelled, "She's into the field now!" That meant she was in the long L-shaped field that ran up by the house. If she got around the center, heading toward the lane, the gate was open. The truck had been driven into the field this morning. My father shouted to me because I was on the other side of the fence, nearest the lane. "Go shut the gate!" I could run very fast. I ran across the garden, past the tree where our swing had hung, and jumped across a ditch into the lane. There was the open gate. She had not got out. I could not see her up the road. She must have run to the other end of the field. The gate was heavy. I lifted it out of the gravel and carried it across the roadway. I had had it halfway across when she came in sight, galloping straight towards me. There was just time to get the chain on. Laird came scrambling through the ditch to help me. Instead of shutting the gate, I opened it as wide as I could. I did not make any decision to do this. It was just what I did. Flora never slowed down. She galloped straight past me, and Laird jumped up and down, yelling, "Shut it! Shut it!" even after it was too late. My father and Henry appeared in the field a moment too late to see what I had done. They only saw Flora heading for the township road. They would think I had not got there in time. And now for the ending that I think most of us know, but is wonderful to repeat. So Laird goes off with the men. They track her down. She knows that it's a waste anyway because the horse can't get free. Everything's fenced around and re-fenced. It was later than 1 o'clock when the truck came back. The tarpaulin was over the back, which meant there was meat in it. My mother had to heat dinner up all over again. Henry and my father had changed from their bloody overalls into ordinary working overalls in the barn, and they washed their arms and necks and faces at the sink and splashed water on their hair and combed it. Laird lifted his arm to show off a streak of blood. "We shot old Flora," he said, "and cut her up in 50 pieces. "Well, I don't want to hear about it," my mother said, "and don't come to my table like that." My father made him go and wash the blood off. We sat down and my father said grace, and Henry pasted his chewing gum on the end of his fork, the way he always did. When he took it off, he would have us admire the pattern. We began to pass the bowls of steaming overcooked vegetables. Laird looked across the table at me and proudly said distinctly, Anyway, it was her fault Flora got away. What? My father said. She could have shut the gate, and she didn't. She just opened it up and Flora ran out. Is that right? My father said. Everybody at the table was looking at me. I nodded, swallowing food with great difficulty. To my shame, tears flooded my eyes. My father made a curt sound of disgust. What did you do that for? I didn't answer. I put down my fork and waited to be sent from the table, still not looking up. But this did not happen. For some time, nobody said anything. And then Laird said matter-of-factly, "She's crying." "Never mind," my father said. He spoke with resignation, even good humor, the words which absolved and dismissed me for good. "She's only a girl," he said. I didn't protest that, even in my heart. Maybe it was true. Thank you.
So now we will just have some food, I guess, and mingle. We do have an Alice Munro quiz, I believe, that Ginny and her... And we do have some prizes for that, so please pick up a copy. I guess it's on the table there. And there's also a biography of Alice Munro that Ying has prepared. And I also just wanted to thank Penny Haggerty for giving us a video clip, which we'll play now that the speeches are over. And also Shannon Smurl, who's got some feed, Twitter and so on, I think, from the recent events. And so, yeah, just watch those as you're munching and enjoy the moment. Thank you again for coming and celebrate.
Why?